Hello, friends, and welcome back. Let's talk about English non-fictional prose written during 19th century in this video. But before we begin to speak about that, let's first of all try to understand what is 19th century. 19th century can be broadly divided into two groups. Broadly, I'm saying, not exactly or precisely, I'm saying it can be broadly divided into two groups. The first part of the 19th century, that is period from 1800 to 1850, can be called the Romantic period, and period from 1850 to 1901 can be called the Victorian period. This is how general classification of the 19th century is done. Actually, Victorian age begins from 1837 with the accession of Queen Victoria to the throne of England. Before that, there was George III, that is George William Frederick, as the King of England, and after him, from 1820 to 30, George Augustus Frederick was the King of England. So we're going to talk about non-fictional prose writings during this period. The first part of the 19th century is known as a Romantic period. We all know that. And William Wordsworth, E.S.T. Coleridge, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, these were the famous Romantic poets. But as we're not going to talk about poetry, we're going to speak about non-fictional prose during 19th century. We're not going to deal with the poetry written by these people. However, these people have also dealt with non-fictional prose writings. So we'll talk about the non-fictional prose writings of William Wordsworth, E.S.T. Coleridge, P.B. Shelley, and John Keats. Let us first of all talk about William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth is famously known as a Romantic poet. However, his preface to lyrical ballads, preface written to his famous book Lyrical Ballads, that is preface to lyrical ballads, is one of the most popular non-fiction prose texts. Preface to Lyrical Ballads was published in 1800. Its revised edition was published in 1802. It is also said that the English Romantic age begins with the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798. Another famous Romantic poet is S.T. Coleridge. He is considered as important as William Wordsworth in literature. His Biographia Literaria is a brilliant piece of literary criticism. It is a biography of literature. The concepts like fancy and imagination are explicitly explained by Coleridge in his Biographia Literaria. P.B. Shelley has also written his scholarly essay entitled A Defense of Poetry in 1821. He makes his famous claim that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world in this essay. His most loved definition of poetry, that it is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds, appears in the same essay. John Keats, another famous Romantic poet, is famous for his letters. His letters are the famous example of non-fictional prose writings. His letters provide commentary on nature and function of poetry. The letters written to his friend Leigh Hunt especially discuss the nature and function of poetry. His notion of poetry can be summed up as a life of sensation rather than of thoughts. And his notion of life can be summed up as a large mansion of many apartments. His notion of negative capability also appears in his letters. Charles Lamb is one of the famous writers of non-fictional prose during this period. He is another notable figure of non-fictional prose writings and famously known for his Essays of Elia. Essays of Elia were published in 1820 and 1823. His another notable collection of essays is Last Essays of Elia, published in 1833. His best known essays are Two Races of Men, Dream Children, A Reverie, and Old China. Tales from Shakespeare, which was published in 1807, and Adventures of Ulysses, which was published in 1808, are regarded as children's literature. Lamb produced these works along with his sister Mary. Specimens of English dramatic poets who lived about the time of Shakespeare, published in 1808, is his another significant creation. We cannot forget to talk about William Hazlitt if we are talking about non-fictional prose written during the 19th century. William Hazlitt is another significant non-fictional prose writer of this age. He lived between 1778 and 1830. He is best known for his essays. His essays deal with vast range of topics in vigorous style. His famous essays are On Criticism, On Poetry in General, and On Byron. Hazlitt's first collection of literary sketches entitled Round Table was published in 1817. He has also written characters of Shakespeare's plays. It was published in 1817 again. He has discussed the characters in Shakespeare's plays as independent psychological characters in this work. His other famous writings are On the English Poets. It is a speech published in 1818. On English Comic Writers. This is also speech published in 1819. On the Dramatic Literature of the Age of Elizabeth. It is again a speech published in 1820. Table Talk is a collection of critical essays published in 1821 and 22. The Spirit of Age was published in 1825 and The Plain Speaker was published in 1826. Thus, William Hazlitt has a lot of things written during this period. Now let's talk about Thomas de Quincey. Thomas de Quincey lived between 1785 and 1859. He is a famous writer because he has written autobiographical work entitled Confession of an Opium Eater. Confession of an Opium Eater was published in 1821. It tells the story of his early life and the impact of opium on it. His another important work is Autobiography. It was written during 1834 and 1853. He has also written some essays. Some of his popular essays include On Knocking at the Gate in Macbeth, Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts, The Literature of the Knowledge, and The Literature of the Power. His Reminiscence of English Lake Poets is also a significant work. It is a character study of Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Wordsworth's sister Dorothy. Thomas Malthus is another popular non-fictional prose writer of this period. His essay on population was published in 1798. It is one of the important texts that contribute to issues like population and economics. He says that as the population increased, the natural checks like misery, poverty, disease, and war become necessary in order to prevent the overpopulation. Thomas Carlyle is also an important writer of non-fictional prose. He lived between 1795 and 1881. He is a significant non-fictional prose writer. He was influenced by German transcendentalism. He wrote Life of Schiller in 1823. He has translated Goethe's Wilhelm Meister in 1882. He is well known for his 4 volumes of Specimens of German Romance. He has also produced the work entitled French Revolution in 1837. He has also produced works such as Letters and Speeches of Oliver Cromwell. It was published in 1845, and 6 volumes of Frederick the Great, which was published during 1858 to 65. His Heroes and Hero Worship, which was very famous and seminal book, was published in 1841. In his book Heroes and Hero Worship, hero is divinity, poets, priest, men of letters, and king. Now, divinity, according to him, is Prophet Muhammad. Poets, according to him, are Dante and Shakespeare. Priest, according to him, is Luther and Knox. Men of letters, according to him, are Johnson, Rousseau, and Burns. And king, according to him, are Cromwell and Napoleon. Thomas Babington Macaulay is also a famous writer of non-fictional prose during this period. He is also known as Lord Macaulay. He lived between 1800 and 1859. He was believed to be an eminent Victorian in the true sense. He is infamously known for his Minutes on Indian Education, also known as Macaulay's Minutes. His Minutes appeared in 1835. He has written History of England from the accession of James II. It was an ambitious project that ran in 5 volumes. 5th volume was published after his death by his sister, Lady Trevelyan, in 1861. Who cannot forget to speak of Jon Stewart Mill if one is speaking about non-fictional prose writings during 19th century? Jon Stewart Mill was born in 1806 and died in 1873. He constructed a theory based on the principle of greatest happiness. His work, Autobiography, published in 1873, was published after his death, and it speaks about the futility of purely analytical approach to most profound human problems. His political and philosophical works are On Liberty, which was published in 1859, Thoughts on Parliamentary Reforms, which was published in 1859 again, Representative Government, published in 1863, The Subject of Women, published in 1869, and Three Essays on Religion, published in 1874. Now let's talk about John Henry Newman, who was born in 1801 and died in 1900. He was one of the popular figures of the Oxford movement. He is popularly known as Cardinal Newman. He is famous for his tracts, sermons, theological writings, and essays. Idea of a University is his famous work. It discusses the intellectual culture as something desirable apart from the religious and moral culture. There is another famous writer called John Ruskin. John Ruskin lived between 1819 and 1900. He is a famous Victorian non-fictional prose writer. As we are talking about prose writings during the 19th century, we also are including Victorian period in it. John Ruskin has written Stones of Venice in 3 volumes. It was published between 1843 and 1860. His monumental work, Modern Painters, was published between 1843 and 1860. It runs into 5 volumes. He has expressed his views on art. His another work, 7 Lamps of Architecture, published in 1849, relates art to morality. His another work, Sisme and Lilies, published in 1865, is an expression of his views on meaning of life and relation of beauty to dignity in everyday life. His most celebrated work, Unto This Last, which was published during 1860 and 62, deals with his concerns on what industrialism has done to the lives of people in England and what remedy could be there for the establishment of healthy society. Thus, John Ruskin was also worried for the society, so he has written about society too. There is another writer of non-fictional prose called William Morris. William Morris lived between 1834 and 1896. He used art as an active propaganda for socialism in his News from Nowhere. News from Nowhere was published in 1891. His another work, A Dream of John Ball, was published in 1888. It discusses peasants' revolt of 1381. Let us talk about Walter Pater. Walter Pater lived between 1839 and 1894. He was famously known for his stand on art for art's sake, or art for the sake of art. His Studies in History of the Renaissance is his significant work and was published in 1873. The famous critic Matthew Arnold also belonged to the same period. Matthew Arnold was born in 1822 and died in 1888. He was a famous Victorian poet and a non-fictional prose writer. He thought that art is the remedy for the disease of the contemporary civilization. He also thought that literature was the answer for the growing materialism in England. His famous non-fictional prose work is Culture and Anarchy. It was published in 1869. He divides people into barbarians, Philistines, populists in his essay. Barbarians are aristocrats, Philistines are the middle class, and populists are the working class, according to him. He lays a great emphasis on middle class as a class with strength and potential. His another work on translating Homer is also popular. He has also written essays in criticism. These are also his famous work. Now let's talk about the man who revolutionized the world with his epoch-making text, The Origin of Species. He is none other than Charles Darwin. His The Origin of Species was published in 1859. His important work related to selection and evolution of man is Descent of Man, and it was published in 1871. His influence can be seen on the works of George Bernard Shaw and D.H. Lawrence too. Thomas Henry Huxley, who lived between 1825 and 1895, was a man of science. He was a biologist and essayist. He said that man has the ability to control his destiny. According to him, man can control his destiny if he is given proper education and if the government does its duty honestly. Some of his important essays are Science and Culture and Other Essays, published in 1881, 19th Century, published in 1880, and American Discourse, published in 1885. James Anthony Froude, who lived between 1818 and 1894, has also made a significant contribution to English non-fictional prose writing during 19th century. His important works are History of England from the Fall of Cardinal Wolsey to the Spanish Armada. This was written during 1856 and 1870. His another work is English Seamen in the 16th Century, and it was published in 1895. And his yet another work is 4 volumes of short studies in great subjects, which was published during 1867 and 1883. Some other important non-fictional prose writers of 19th century and their works can be cited as Sir John R. Seeley, who has written Expansion of England in 1883, John Richard Green, who has written History of English People in 4 volumes during 1878 to 1880, E. A. Freeman, who has written History of Norman Conquest in 6 volumes during 1881 and 82, and Henry Thomas Buckle, who has written History of Civilization in England during 1857 and 82. Well, that's all from English non-fictional prose during 19th century. I hope it was a useful video. I hope it will also be useful to you in future too if you watch it, because it will give you a general idea about the non-fictional prose writings during 19th century, that is during the Romantic period and Victorian period. And in the next video we'll talk about the non-fictional prose writings during 20th century. I hope this was a useful video. If it was useful, please hit the like button, share and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.